Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a while. Um, it is I, your friendly neighborhood moviegoer, John L. And, well, I'm back, folks. And, it's been a tough month, a month of adjustment for me as I have gotten back into the swing of things for work. And not a lot of time is on the schedule. I've haven't been able to record the episodes for the pod as I've wanted to. The body, as you get older, starts to tell you no at times. So, for me, it's just taking the time out and seeing as to where I can actually develop the episodes for the pod, or if I'm gonna reconstruct the format of the pod, and that's what I've decided on. Um, so I feel like I'm gonna do these weekly, but all in one shot. For this particular recording, I'm gonna give you reviews on all the movies I've watched since the last time I've spoken to you guys, which was the review for John Wick 4. Um, so, with all that being said, I'm going to talk to you guys about what's been on the calendar since John Wick 4 and how we're going to go about it and what my thoughts were. So, here we go. Um, so, that following Saturday, after I watched John Wick 4 on March 23rd on a Thursday, that's Saturday the 25th in the morning time, I watched a movie called A Good Person. A Good Person stars Florence Pugh and Morgan Freeman. The basic synopsis of the movie says that Morgan Freeman's character, his name is Daniel, is brought together with Allison, who's Florence Pugh's character, the once thriving young woman with a bright future who was involved in an unimaginable tragedy that took his daughter's life. As grief-stricken Daniel navigates raising his teenage granddaughter and Allison seeks redemption, they discover the friendship, forgiveness, and hope can flourish in unlikely places. So, in this movie, I thought that they did a good job um, structuring the dynamic of how different people deal with grief. Not only do we deal or do we encounter Morgan Freeman's character Daniel dealing with grief, we also encounter how Florence Pugh's character deals with grief. We deal with how Morgan Freeman's granddaughter in the movie deals with grief of losing her mother. So, in the movie, what we have here at the beginning of the movie, we have this tragic car accident, in where Florence Pugh's future sister-in-law, the sister of Florence Pugh's fiance in the movie, was in the passenger seat of Florence Pugh's car. They were driving. They were getting, I believe, Florence Pugh was getting wedding gown sized or whatever the case is, and then Florence Pugh was looking down at her phone at a specific instance and took her eyes off the road, and then some sort of a utility vehicle or some sort of a construction vehicle crashed into the passenger side of the vehicle and killed her future sister-in-law during the process, and her husband at the same time. So that's the tragedy that sets up the entire plot. So Florence Pugh, in her attempt to deal with the grief, she sinks into a deep depression and then gets involved with drug and alcohol abuse. Daniel, who is the father, Morgan Freeman in this case, a recovering addict himself for over 20 years, um, comes to deal with the grief in his own way. Um, at the beginning of the movie, him just needing assistance from from an emotional standpoint, right? Him being a recovering addict, he hadn't fallen back into the addiction, not until I would say 3/4 of the way into the movie, being that he was at that point overwhelmed with having to take care of his granddaughter and different situations that were stressors in the life. And it was a unique view at how this sort of stuff happens, right? Because at the end of the day, different people deal with grief in different ways. Some people self-medicate. Other people look for emotional, I would say, stability and or support in order to deal with grief. Other people lash out while dealing with grief, which was more the granddaughter's standpoint in this film. And at the same time, other people evade while dealing with grief, which is what happened with the fiance, the brother of the woman who died. In this case, Florence Pugh's fiance, he ended up just evading the situation altogether. Florence Pugh ended up leaving him after the accident and things of that nature due to her unstableness, let's just say. And it all went downhill from there. So throughout the movie, you see all these different episodes of how people are dealing, and you uncover different things about Morgan Freeman's character Daniel as a father in the early years of his kids' lives, and how abusive he was because he was a bad drunk and things of that nature, which is how he went out and got help. And in this instance, the reason as to why Daniel and Morgan Freeman's character and Florence Pugh's character got together is because Florence Pugh ended up in the same self-help group or help group, an anonymous group, either Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous group that was being put together in his church. And basically the story then unfolds there as they start to rebuild their relationship and tell each other harsh truths, but at the same time they start to alleviate some of the mental and emotional pain, while yet still dealing with the day-to-day. Morgan Freeman's character dealing with raising his granddaughter, a teenage granddaughter at that, her messing around with boys, and then at the same time being a teenager, wanting to be out with her friends, partying, things of that nature, and such and such. And Florence Pugh wanted to help out, but then not necessarily knowing how to help out because she's still dealing with her own issues, with her substance abuse and stuff like that, or whatever the case is. So I felt like the film depicted all that well. From an acting standpoint, I felt like everybody did a decent job. It wasn't, any the performances weren't earth-shattering or anything like that. I've seen darker stuff, but at the end of the day, just watching the trailers for this film didn't lead me to believe that this is going to be a tonally very dark movie. So they kept it relatively light, but at the same time, they still touched on points which made you feel a certain way about Florence Pugh's character, the same way that you felt about Morgan Freeman's character. Florence Pugh's character goes through a couple of situations in where she has to basically realize that she is an addict, and come to the realization that addicts do, to use a colloquialism, do the most in order to get their fix. And she went through that particular phase of her addiction in the movie, and at the same time she went through a phase where she was trying to be helpful, but she really couldn't because her addiction was taking over, and she couldn't necessarily help others because she wasn't being able to help herself. And then the uncovering or the realization of Daniel being a bad, drunk, and abusive father in the early years of his kids was something that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but not that it threw me for a loop, but I would say it made for the connection between Florence Pugh's character and Morgan Freeman's character more relatable in that sense, and valid, because Morgan Freeman, even though through all the pain and all the grief that he was feeling over his daughter's death, was still willing to help Florence Pugh's character, even though he blamed her for his daughter's death. So at the end of it all, things not that things ended up hunky dory, right? Spoiler alert: Morgan Freeman's character by the end of the movie dies. He passes away. He was an older gentleman and things of that nature. Health concerns and all that came about, and at the time of the funeral, the ex-fiance had been in a relationship post the engagement relationship with another woman, but then that particular relationship ended. He more or less decided to rebuild his relationship with Florence Pugh's character, but not to the extent of they got back together and it was all happily ever after. No, more like Florence Pugh was an extended part of the family, and she was willing to help out to raise Morgan Freeman's granddaughter after Morgan Freeman's death. Now, her uncle, the ex-fiance, in all this, being the caretaker and guardian of this teenage girl, you know, all these different situations and tragedies and everything in between led to all these strange bedfellows. But at the end of the day, it was a very interconnected weave of all these people and how they were dealing with this grief, and how they continued to deal with this grief in their own way. By the end of it all, Florence Pugh's character was still dealing with her addiction, but she was on the other side of it, not necessarily at 100%, but she was on the right track, and we got that part of it. The young teenage girl, she was more of the lash out victim, losing both of her parents and things of that nature, and just having a bad attitude and still being a teenager at the same time, and then experimenting here and there and stuff like that. So putting gray hairs in people's heads and stuff. So that was her way of dealing with the grief. And at the same time, the ex-fiance, he was the quintessential person who didn't deal with the grief at all. He just went from one day to the next without necessarily sitting with it and realizing as to what happened. I liked the film. I thought it told a decent and good story. I thought that I thought that the acting was decent. Nothing out of this world. I didn't think that it was overly done or anything like that. It wasn't extra. It wasn't like those dramatizations you see on TV and things of that nature. So Zach Braff, the director of this movie, I think did a decent job with another project here, basically wanting to depict as to how different people, different age ranges, different races, different backgrounds deal with their own grief, and also dealing with addiction in America today, in one whole movie. So you got that. So that's my take on this movie. I think that folks should watch it just so that they can understand the different points of views and perspectives as to how people deal with grief in lieu of tragedy and things of that nature. So next up, the movie that I saw after that was Inside, starring Willem Dafoe. I saw that movie on a Monday. This movie was more... It was interesting, man. It was interesting. So, to say the least, I want to say this about this movie, because at times directors are very self-indulgent and they want to tell their stories the way they want to tell it. They're not necessarily in the business of the movie making business in order to make back the money that you were that someone invested in your movie, in order to the business end of it, in order for you to make it back via the box office. This wasn't one of those movies. This was a very high art movie, right? And to cut back to a good person for a real quick bit, I just wanted to give you guys the same stuff that I was giving you before. Rotten Tomato scores. So the critics at 57%. It was not a certified fresh. This is a Rotten Tomato, but the audience score for a good person was at 96%. So the people who actually went out to see the movie thought very positively about the movie. So the audience score is better than the critic score. So I am in line with what the audience thought. I thought it was a good film. I thought it was a film that I think is a film that people need to watch, and at the same time, so that they can understand as to what's going on in society, how grief stricken people deal, and at the same time, understanding that not all addiction stems from where you come from and what kind of background you have. So events in people's lives also can start addiction as well. But back to Inside, like I said, high art film. I thought based on the trailers, I thought that there was going to be much more dialogue in this film, and there wasn't. Willem Dafoe in this film, as always in most films, did a tremendous job. We were really more or less encountering a film where Willem Dafoe was doing a lot more physical acting, a lot more facial acting, and things of that nature, which he's great at as well. But like I said, this movie lacked a lot of dialogue. The reason being, what I thought about it was the premise of the film was that Willem Dafoe was an art thief, and he scaled this building, entered the home of this art collector and things of that nature, and he was there to steal this art and get out within a certain time frame. This is a high security home. He couldn't get out in time. He gets locked in there for God knows how long, right? So it then became a survival movie. But within the survival movie, obviously Willem Dafoe didn't have anybody to play off of, right? He was just in there trying to find a way to get out. The reason as to why I call this a high art movie is because not only did you see high art inside of the home of this art collector, a lot of the art was expressionist art. So it being expressionist art, it wanting people to interpret and understand the expression of what was on said canvas, or it could have been an exhibition, it could have been video, it could have been a short film, whatever it was being exhibited within this home, because this home was it was a home, but yet to a sense of it was someone's home, but at the same time it was an art exhibit. It was an expressionist exhibit. And the reason as to why I say it's expressionist is because of the kind of art that was being depicted in the movie. That being said, because it was expressionist art, we also were led to understand and visualize the expression or expressions from Willem Dafoe in this movie through his sense and skills of survival, right? So I thought that was keen and unique. I might be reading too much into it, but this is my particular interpretation of the film. There was that dynamic of the expressionist art along with the expressionist acting that was going on, because you have to read more of Willem Dafoe's expressions through the film instead of understanding the acting through dialogue. And then the secondary part of it was also understanding how in God's green earth was he going to get out of this apartment, right? I read other reviews where they said they were on, folks were on pins and needles in the edge of their seats because it was anxiety inducing, and it wasn't anxiety inducing to me at all, just for the simple fact that I got so lost in how the expressionist art reflected and had that dynamic with the expressionist acting that Willem Dafoe was exhibiting, but then at the same time understanding that there was this genuine level of human ingenuity that was coming in through the movie, looking and seeing the different parts in the movie where Willem Dafoe was trying to come up with different ways on how to keep himself alive, through how to get water, setting off the fire alarms, having the sprinkler system go off, getting the condensation from the freezer onto the refrigerator wall so that he can stay hydrated throughout the time, and then at the same time just going through all the different cabinets to see as to what was available to eat and keeping himself more or less nourished in that particular perspective. And then at the same time, with all the different pieces of furniture throughout the home, building this, not necessarily a fortress, but this ladder or this pyramid to get to this to get to this high, very high point. I guess the ceilings in the particular apartment were like about, I don't know, I want to say 20 to 30 feet in the air, and there was one particular window that he could probably break out of because all the other windows were unbreakable and bulletproof and things of that nature, so he couldn't do that and get out that way. So this one ceiling sunlight window or whatever was the only way that he can get out. And he put together tools and broke the sediment around the latches and the frame that was keeping this window within the frame, and then eventually he escaped by the end of the movie. Sorry, spoiler. He escaped by the end of the movie. It took damn near 2 hours for him to escape. But you have to understand that not everybody always realizes their circumstances within a very short span of time. It took him so much time to devise not only this plan and put all these things together in order to get to this particular peak, like literally a peak that he built, that he constructed in order to get out. But it also took him time to destroy this frame and placeholder of sediment and concrete that had the frame of this sunlight window put together so that he can get the hell out of that goddamn apartment. And eventually he did, because he was left behind by his partners and stuff like that or whatever, and he eventually got out. It was just one of those movies where, like, to me everything made sense, but it was just so drawn out that I lost interest at certain times in the movie. And mind you, it's not like it was a 3-hour movie. It's an hour and 45 minutes. But then it's like, it's artsy, it's heady, it's intelligent, but then at the same time, it's like, it's also a survival film. I feel like they tried to fit too much into this 1 hour and 45 minutes within it. But yet again, that is my take on the film Inside with Willem Dafoe. As for the critics liked it more than the audience did. The critics had a 63%. But the audience score was lower, as a 41%. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this movie to people because, like I said, it's heavy, not heavy. It's heady. It's a little bit overwhelming because they try to throw too much at you. Outside of the fact that it's supposed to be a survivalist film, it's also a very, it also shows you how the other side lives, right? The rich, the super rich, and them being in their own world, and then the niche part of these high-end collectors of art and things of that nature, and how they commiserate from time to time, because you had those particular scenes in the movie as well. It just had too many different themes going on at the same time, so that's why I wouldn't necessarily recommend this film Inside. The next film I saw after Inside, was, let's go back to the drawing board here. I saw Dungeons and Dragons on March 30th, on Thursday. I saw that on I think this was the release date. So I saw this at my local AMC, and needless to say, I really, really enjoyed this film. I think that I went into this film with a very, I don't want to say negative thought process, but I didn't think that this film was going to be great. Not that it was great, but it was very fun though. The only bad or sad part about this movie is that it hasn't made its budget back. According to what it is as of right now, the box office gross for this movie is at $74.2 million across the U.S. here domestically, and the movie took $200 million to make. So that's the sad part about it. It's a very fun movie, folks. It's fantasy, and it's a fantasy film. It's based off of the Dungeons and Dragons tactical and board game that came to prominence and popularity in the 80s, and a lot of different people still play it to this day. There was a Dungeons and Dragons cartoon in the 80s as well. There was also a movie that was created in the early 90s or late 80s that was not so great. I recommend this movie to folks. It's very, very fun. I would say about the first 25 minutes to half an hour of the movie, didn't suck me in, just because I thought there was a lot of inside baseball going on there. Like, you had to be a fan of Dungeons and Dragons to understand as to what was going on. Even from a surface level, nothing too deep. Like, understand, like, what certain characters' abilities are and what their purposes are within the game. Like, I didn't know because I've never played Dungeons and Dragons. I just wanted to see the film because obviously I do the pod and on top of everything else, and I'm a fan of Chris Pine. So Chris Pine's in this film. We had who else was in this film? Michelle Rodriguez, Regé Jean Page, Jesse Smith, Sophia Lillis, Chloe Coleman. They all did great. I think everybody did a great job with their roles in this film here. So to give you guys a synopsis, a charming thief and a band of unlikely adventurers undertake an epic heist to retrieve a lost relic, but things go dangerously awry when they run afoul of the wrong people. Dungeons & Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves brings the rich world and playful spirit of the legendary role-playing game to the big screen in a hilarious and action-packed adventure. It was funny. It was action-packed. I thought that the effects were done very, very well. How the story came together, and all the characters' backstories, and how they united, and how they came to be a team, what was cool as well within the structure of the movie. I thought that after that first half an hour where everything was more or less inside baseball and I wasn't getting it, that one particular scene where I believe it was Justice Smith's character met his an ancestor of his and then his future self, because he wasn't necessarily a great wizard at that particular point in time, but he was able to get better throughout the movie. He was actually stealing from people with his wizardry before this point, but that point where he met his ancestor and or older self, that wasn't necessarily clear to me, but that point in the movie is when everything like sunk into me, and I was like, oh, this is fun. I get this. This movie's not bad at all. And then the rest of it with the great action, Michelle Rodriguez is great. I think it's a good time. It's a good family movie. On top of everything else, I know it's PG-13, but there's not anything lewd in the movie at all, and I think that this is a good start to a franchise. Now, being that Hollywood is Hollywood and money has to be made, I'm not too sure if another one's going to be made, but if I believe this is a Paramount movie, yeah, if Paramount believes in the IP enough, they'll make a second one, even though the first one didn't make a great amount of revenue. So Dungeons and Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves, I definitely recommend, and so do the critics and the audience. The critic scores at a 90% at 280 reviews, and the audience scores at a 93%. So people who've seen it, critics and audience alike, they love the movie. Just have to, hopefully the word of mouth continues to spread. This does better on demand and home video or digital, and that grows, and they're able to generate more revenue that way, and hopefully in a couple of years we'll see some sort of a sequel to the Dungeons and Dragons Honor Amongst Thieves movie. So that was that. I now have to talk to you guys about this film that I watched called 1001. I watched this movie on March 31st at my local Alamo Draft House, and the main reason as to why I watched this movie was because one, it was a Sundance Festival pick, best drama. That's one. Secondarily, the main reason as to why I watched this film was because it's a New York based film, and if you guys aren't aware, or if I've never said it explicitly on the podcast, I am from New York City, and where the movie was depicted in Harlem is very familiar to me. And that is my biggest takeaway from this movie, the familiarity of it, because it starts or it takes place at the beginning of the movie in the early to mid 90s, which was a time where I was a child and I was growing up and I understood what it was to be in that sort of neighborhood like Harlem, or where I come from, Washington Heights, and things of that nature, which we have a lot of similarities, regardless of what people ever tell you. You know what I'm saying? People can always bark and say what they want about their neighborhood and where they grew up, but we have a lot of similarities between Washington Heights and Harlem and Hamilton Heights and people in the Bronx and things of that nature. We all grew up very similarly, with very similar backgrounds, be it of people of color and different ethnicities and things of that nature, and or how we grow up in a very in these urban communities and stuff like that, and the hardships of it, and whatnot. And this is why I felt like this film was very familiar to me, even though I had never seen it. Right, the character of Inez, played by Tiana Taylor. Let me tell you something, man. I know women like the character of Inez till this day, and it was people will tell you, oh, you know, that's stereotypical. No, no, no. You have to live in this. You have to understand that there's a lot of communities like this around this country, let alone around the world. But let's just leave it to the U.S. And whatnot. There's a lot of communities that build women like Inez, right? Where a lot of people feel disenfranchised and don't necessarily see the forest beyond the trees. You know what I'm saying? And they always stay in one place their entire lives, and that's all they know, and they don't necessarily grow out of what it is that they know and or expand their mindsets and or their horizons and things of that nature. But they make the best of the circumstances that they've been given, or they make certain situations happen within their circumstances that sometimes are better left alone and or not be revealed. This movie, as a story, was it was compelling, folks, but like to me it was a little, to me it was a bit far-fetched. But then at the same time, me knowing people who have gone through the foster system and as either as adults now and or as children, it shone a new light on how things happen in that. And I'll lead you to the synopsis, right? So 1001 follows unapologetic and free-spirited Inez, played by Tiana Taylor, who kidnaps 6-year-old Terry from the foster care system, right? So the trailer shows you that she kidnaps Terry, or quote unquote kidnaps Terry. We are introduced to Terry as her son, but Terry is not Inez's son. By the end of the movie, we come up and we end up realizing that wasn't the case at all. That Tiana Taylor did kidnap Terry from the foster care system because she needed something to hold on to. She needed something or a way out of the recidivist loop that she was going through, because she had been to jail and locked up, and she kept on, for lack of a better term, she kept on fucking up. And she was a early 20-something year old girl who had been in and out of trouble, and she thought by kidnapping this boy out of the foster care system that this would lead her to have something that she can hold on to and believe in and have a purpose in life, right? To raise this boy and help this boy become a good man in life. And to come to find out that she wasn't even his real mom, by the end of the movie, was like, wow. To me, it was like, wait a minute, what? But how does she know this boy? And then you come to find out the relationship that she actually had with Terry's actual parents, who unfortunately succumbed to addiction and died off because in the early 90s, late 80s in New York or in urban communities around the U.S., like the crack epidemic was real. So that was what was taken over at that point, and that's what Terry's birth parents succumbed to. So, be it that Inez knew that, she felt this responsibility, and also she also felt that she needed a purpose, and he was going to be her purpose, and it helped her somewhat progress through life, and she became a hardworking single mother at the time. Then she eventually got into a relationship with the man who himself had been in and out of trouble and whatnot, but helped raise young Terry. and whatnot. And what you see in the movie is the evolution of New York City through the mid '90s, all the way through the early aughts, and stuff like that, which is the time period I grew up in, which is why I say it was very familiar to me. So the dramatics that happen in the movie in that particular vein were very familiar. Also, the familiarity of the the disloyal man who had different women and different children and different women, and how Inez was dealing with that particular situation. It's like that's very common in urban neighborhoods and single parent homes. And even though the dude was a good dude in a sense because he was always there for Terry, he was still a womanizer at the end of the day, right? So, those two things can be true at the same time, and that's why I said it's like, to me, it's very reminiscent and very familiar because I know those situations, either through experience, knowing people like that, and or being in those particular situations. Not necessarily because I have any children and or have had multiple women with multiple children. I don't have any kids myself. I can say that, but knowing that, me living through that. Through my own dad, is something that, like I said, was very familiar and things. So it hit home, this movie, and because it hit home, and because it was so true to the city, true to communities like Harlem, or the community that I grew up in Washington Heights and things of that nature, is why I would recommend this film. Teyana Taylor was incredible in this film. All the actors who played Terry, from young 6-year-old Terry, I would say preteen Terry, 12, 13-year-old Terry, and then late teens, early 20s Terry, was great. The gentleman who played the stepfather role, William Catlett, he played Lucky. He was great in this, man, and all the surrounding characters that made up the hustle and bustle, and the community, and friends, and family like members around Teyana Taylor's character Inez. Man, it felt like home. It just felt like watching an episode of someone who lives next door to you or down the block from you. I would definitely recommend this movie to anybody. It is something that is definitely felt by reviewers and audience members. From a Rotten Tomatoes standpoint, we got a 97% from the critics, 84% from the audience who went out to watch this. The movie is an hour and 57 minutes long. Go out and watch it, folks. I definitely recommend this film to y'all, and it is definitely a good watch. So that is my review and sense of those 4 films. We had A Good Person, we had Inside, we had Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Amongst Thieves, and we had 1001. That rounded up my month of March. I will be back to review another set of films that I have watched since then, but I wanted to give you guys these reviews right away, just so I can have some content back up. I do apologize for the long wait, folks. Hopefully y'all will support and continue to support the podcast and the new structure of it. I will be doing these weekly. I still have and make the time to go out and watch the movies, but it's just more or less I have to do all the reviews in one, and then just try to have it all amalgamated into one recording now, instead of doing all the separate recordings. So that is the programming note. Thank you for everybody listening. As always, all the support I get from across the globe. Thank you. And I'll be back in short order with another set of movies. Appreciate y'all. As always, this has been your friendly neighborhood moviegoer, John L. I'm about this one. Till next time, folks, take care of yourselves, be good to one another, and stay healthy out there. Peace.